A young mother in Idaho rescued a mischievous raccoon, ignoring her neighbor's warnings. What seemed like trouble soon turned into a miracle when, in just 60 fateful seconds, the animal risked everything to save her baby girl from a predator. From fear to redemption, this true bond shows that sometimes family is formed in the wildest, most unexpected ways. Sarah Mitchell's small house sat on the quiet edge of Boise, Idaho, where the last neat yards of the suburbs gave way to tall pines and rough country roads. She had lived there for 2 years since her husband passed away, raising her little girl Chloe on her own. Life was steady but lonely, filled with long shifts at the local clinic and evenings that seemed to stretch on in silence. Yet one spring morning, that routine changed forever when she found an injured raccoon on the roadside. The animal was sprawled in the gravel shoulder, its gray coat matted with dirt, one paw twisted oddly. Sarah had seen plenty of injured creatures before, dogs hit by cars, cats with broken bones, but this one looked different. Its black-ringed eyes blinked at her with a strange, pleading intelligence. Against every bit of common sense, she gathered it into a blanket and carried it home. Chloe, not even 2 years old, squealed with delight at the sight of the furry stranger, clapping her tiny hands as if Sarah had brought home a gift meant just for her. Sarah named him Bandit, mostly because of the dark mask of fur around his eyes, and partly because of his sneaky habit of stealing whatever food he could reach. At first, she planned only to keep him in the shed until the local wildlife rehab center could take over, but the center was overcrowded, and the weeks stretched into months. By then, Bandit had healed, though he never quite lost the limp in his paw. He was too wild to be a pet, but too damaged to fend entirely for himself in the woods. Life with a raccoon turned out to be a comedy of trouble and tenderness. Bandit had a knack for popping lids off trash cans and dragging leftovers across the lawn. More than once, Sarah came home to find her shoes missing, only to discover them hidden under the porch where the rascal had stashed his treasures. He would climb onto the kitchen counter as if he owned the place, plunging his nimble paws into the cereal box while Chloe laughed so hard she nearly toppled out of her chair. His mischief brought headaches, but also a kind of warmth the house hadn't known since Sarah's husband passed. Still, not everyone found it charming. Their neighbor, Tom Walker, a retired army sergeant with a gravelly voice and sharp eyes, made his opinion clear. One evening, as Sarah tried to pull Bandit away from Tom's overturned bird feeder, the old man crossed his arms and said flatly, "That creature doesn't belong here. One day he'll turn on you. Mark my words." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "He's not dangerous, Tom. He just likes to explore." Tom shook his head, muttering something about instincts and wild blood before heading back inside. His words stuck with her longer than she cared to admit. She knew Tom had seen more of the world's dangers than she ever would. Yet when she looked at Chloe giggling on the floor as Bandit pawed gently at her toy blocks, Sarah couldn't believe harm was written in those clever eyes. Bandit's presence soon became the talk of the little neighborhood. Kids riding bikes up the street nicknamed him Masked Trouble, and sometimes they'd leave scraps of apple or crackers by the fence, laughing when he snatched them up with greedy paws. Parents were less amused, whispering that Sarah was reckless to let a wild animal live so close to a baby. Sarah bore their disapproval with the weary patience of a single mother used to judgment. What they couldn't see was the way Bandit always seemed to watch Chloe, not with hunger, but with a watchfulness that made her heart ache. One Saturday morning, Sarah stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee and found Chloe sitting in the grass. Bandit crouched nearby, pawing curiously at the child's bright red rattle. Instead of crying, Chloe squealed with joy and reached out. Bandit froze, then leaned forward just enough to sniff the toy before scuttling backward with mock alarm. The sight was so ridiculous that Sarah laughed out loud, the sound startling even herself. For the first time in months, the house felt less like a burden and more like a home. But as evening fell and Sarah collected the day's laundry, Tom's warning replayed in her mind. She had chosen compassion over caution, and in that choice lived a constant worry. Bandit was unpredictable, mischievous, and entirely wild. She loved the laughter he brought, but sometimes, late at night, she asked herself whether she had invited trouble right into the heart of her fragile little family. That question would be answered sooner than she ever imagined. By the time summer came, Bandit had already made his mark on the neighborhood. Sarah tried to keep him close to the yard, but raccoons had a way of slipping through fences and squeezing under gates. One afternoon, she caught him climbing into Mrs. Palmer's garage, his paws wrapped around a bag of dog food nearly as big as himself. Sarah apologized so many times she lost count, while Bandit sat in the grass with crumbs on his whiskers, blinking innocently as if the whole mess had nothing to do with him. The truth was, people in the cul-de-sac didn't know what to make of Sarah's unusual houseguest. The children adored him, trailing after him on bicycles and tossing bits of apple slices whenever they spotted him nosing around. "Mass trouble!" they'd shout, laughing as Bandit darted across the yards with his striped tail sticking up like a flag. Their parents, though, were less amused. Sarah could feel their stares when she walked to her car for work, Chloe on her hip and Bandit waddling behind like a shadow. Tom Walker, her retired army neighbor, remained the loudest critic. He would lean on his fence post and wait for her to come home, his arms folded across his chest. "You think it's funny now," he said one evening after Bandit had knocked over another garbage can, "but wild things don't stay cute forever. They've got instincts you can't erase, and that baby of yours—" His voice trailed off, heavy with warning. Sarah tightened her grip on Chloe, who was giggling and pointing at Bandit digging a hole by the hydrangeas. She wanted to tell Tom to mind his own business, but his words sank deep, the way blunt truth sometimes does. She knew he meant well, yet when she looked at Bandit's mischievous face, she couldn't believe danger lived inside him. Life inside the house was a comedy of chaos. Bandit had figured out how to nudge open the flap of the pet door Sarah had installed years earlier for the old family cat. Now, instead of a cat, it was a raccoon that strolled through the kitchen. More than once, Sarah found him perched on the counter plunging his nimble paws into the cereal box while Chloe squealed with laughter from her high chair. On another morning, she walked in to see him tugging at the corner of the rug with such determination that the lamp nearly toppled off the table. "Bandit!" Sarah groaned, but it was hard to stay angry when Chloe clapped her hands, chanting his name in her small, sweet voice. The raccoon cocked his head as though he understood every sound. Sometimes Sarah wondered if he truly did. Despite the mischief, there were moments that made her heart swell. Chloe's first attempt at saying his name came on a quiet afternoon when the house was still. She sat on the carpet with a pile of wooden blocks, Bandit lounging nearby, paw lazily tracing patterns on the floor. Out of nowhere, Chloe pointed and said clear as day, "Ba-ndit." Sarah froze, eyes wide, then let out a laugh that was half joy, half disbelief. The raccoon lifted his head, blinked at the little girl, and gave a slow nod, as if he too understood the significance. It was in those moments that Sarah felt less like a woman burdened by grief, and more like a mother who had stumbled onto something extraordinary. Bandit filled the empty corners of the house, not with words or affection, but with presence, with mischief that softened her loneliness. But the unease in the neighborhood kept growing. When Bandit raided the fruit stand at the farmer's market on the edge of town, the vendor stormed up to Sarah's door demanding payment. She had to hand over $20 while Bandit sat behind her legs, licking juice from his paws. "You can't keep treating it like a pet," the man snapped before driving off. Sarah shut the door, heat burning in her cheeks, wishing she could scold the raccoon the way she might scold a child. Instead, she sighed and cleaned sticky paw prints from the floor. Tom heard about the market incident before the day was done. That evening he came over, his face carved with the sternness of years in uniform. "I've seen things, Sarah," he told her, standing on her porch. "I know how quick instincts turn. You can laugh it off all you want, but one day that animal will remind you what it is, and you'll regret it." Sarah wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, his words clung to her like burrs. She thought of Chloe toddling across the living room floor, her arms stretched toward Bandit, laughing as he batted a ball of yarn. The sight was adorable, yes, but what if Tom was right? What if the line between mischief and menace was thinner than she wanted to admit? Later that night, when Chloe had fallen asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah sat on the couch, staring at the raccoon curled up in a laundry basket. His chest rose and fell softly, his masked face relaxed in slumber. He looked harmless, even sweet. She rubbed her tired eyes and whispered, "You're not going to hurt us, are you?" Of course, Bandit didn't answer. But as if sensing her unease, he shifted and stretched, letting out a soft chitter that sounded almost like comfort. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, something halfway between trust and fear. She had chosen this path, for better or worse. Bandit was here, part of their lives, and she would have to see it through. What she didn't know was that Tom's warning was about to be tested in a way none of them could have predicted. The moment would come suddenly, on an ordinary afternoon when she looked away for just 60 seconds. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, laying warm golden stripes across the linoleum floor. Sarah had just finished scrubbing the last of the breakfast dishes and was folding laundry in the living room when Chloe toddled over with her favorite wooden blocks clutched in both hands. The little girl babbled in that sweet nonsense language only toddlers knew, tugging at Sarah's sleeve and pointing toward the backyard. "All right, Pumpkin," Sarah said with a tired smile. "Let's get you some fresh air." She spread a soft blanket in the middle of the yard, setting Chloe down with the blocks. Bandit was already out there, sprawled on his belly by the fence, digging into the dirt as though searching for buried treasure. His striped tail flicked lazily, but his masked eyes never seemed far from Chloe. The raccoon had a way of watching her that made Sarah's chest tighten, protective almost, though she knew Tom would laugh at the thought. For a while, it was peace itself. Chloe clapped her blocks together, giggling at the hollow sound, while Bandit waddled over to sniff at the toys. He pawed one up, studied it, then dropped it with a grunt, apparently unimpressed. Sarah chuckled under her breath. Even his mischief had softened lately, as though he understood Chloe's things were off-limits. The dryer buzzed from the mudroom inside. Sarah glanced toward the back door. Just one load of laundry left to fold before supper. She hesitated, scanning the yard, her baby sitting contentedly, Bandit lounging in the sun, nothing but stillness beyond the fence. "It'll only take a minute," she murmured. She stepped into the house, the door swinging shut behind her. Her hands worked quickly, pulling warm shirts and socks from the dryer, stacking them into the basket. She was already thinking ahead, what to cook for dinner, whether she had time to bathe Chloe before bedtime, when a low, guttural noise cut through the hum of the quiet house. It was not a sound Sarah had heard often, but she recognized it instantly. Bandit's warning growl. The shirt slipped from her hands. Her pulse jumped. She dashed back toward the kitchen, heart thudding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She flung open the door to the yard. The blanket was empty. "Chloe?" Her voice cracked into the air. Her eyes swept the grass in a frenzy until she spotted movement near the porch steps. Bandit was there, dragging Chloe by the back of her little dress, his sharp teeth sunk firmly into the cloth, but not her skin. Chloe's face was wide-eyed, startled but silent, her small fists clutching at tufts of grass as she slid across the lawn. For a terrifying moment, Sarah saw only what any mother would see, a wild animal hauling her baby away. Her stomach lurched. A scream tore from her throat. "Bandit, no!" The raccoon dropped Chloe instantly and whipped around, his body crouched low, his attention fixed not on Sarah but on the blanket left behind. And then Sarah saw it, saw what Bandit had seen before she stepped outside. There, coiled in the patch of sunlight where Chloe had been playing, was a coyote. Its ribs showed beneath a ragged coat, its yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. The beast's lips curled back to show a row of teeth sharp as knives. It had crept in silently from the tree line, and if Bandit hadn't moved Chloe, the child would have been within striking distance. Sarah froze, clutching Chloe against her chest. Her mind reeled from terror to disbelief. She realized then what Bandit had done. He hadn't been hurting her daughter at all. He had pulled her away, and now he stood between them and the predator. The raccoon's fur bristled, making him appear larger than he was. He hissed, his sharp claws digging into the dirt. The coyote lowered its head and prowled closer, a growl rumbling in its throat. "No," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she spoke to the raccoon or the wild dog. Her hands trembled as she backed toward the porch, Chloe clinging to her neck, her cries beginning to pierce the stillness. The coyote lunged. Bandit met it head-on. He was smaller, slower, but he launched himself with the ferocity of a creature with nothing to lose. His body struck the coyote's muzzle, claws raking across its nose. The bigger animal yelped, jerking its head, but it did not back away. It snapped its jaws and caught Bandit by the shoulder. The raccoon shrieked, twisting desperately, biting back with all his strength. Sarah's scream joined the chaos. She wanted to rush forward, to pull him away, but fear rooted her to the porch. The fight was a blur of fur and sound, Bandit's small body whipping like a rag in the coyote's jaws before he clawed free, blood staining the grass. He stumbled but did not retreat, circling with teeth bared, his chest heaving. A shotgun blast split the air. The coyote jerked back, ears flattened, eyes wide. From across the fence, Tom Walker's tall frame appeared, rifle in hand. Smoke curled from the barrel. He had fired into the air, not at the animal, but the message was enough. With a snarl, the coyote turned tail and darted for the tree line, disappearing into the shadows. For a heartbeat, the yard was still. Then Sarah dropped to her knees. Bandit lay sprawled on his side, his gray coat matted with blood where the coyote's teeth had pierced his shoulder. His sides rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. Chloe sobbed in Sarah's arms, her tiny fingers clinging to her mother's collar. Tom vaulted the fence, landing heavily beside them. His eyes took in the scene, the crying child, the wounded raccoon, and for once his face showed no judgment, only grim concern. "Get him in the car," he said quickly. "There's no time to waste," Sarah nodded, numb with shock. She gathered Chloe tight against her chest and reached for Bandit with her free hand. He stirred faintly, his masked face lifting just enough to glance toward Chloe before his eyes closed again. It had been 60 seconds, that was all. A single minute to fold a basket of laundry, and the world had changed. The smell of blood lingered in the grass as Sarah knelt, clutching Chloe so tightly the child whimpered in protest. Bandit lay motionless only a few feet away, his fur damp and dark where the coyote's teeth had torn into him. The yard, once full of ordinary afternoon sounds, was silent except for the faint rattle of Chloe's sobs and Bandit's labored breathing. Tom Walker stood nearby, his rifle still in his hands, his eyes trained on the tree line as though expecting the predator to return. He had seen enough in his years of service to know that wild animals didn't always back down after one warning. The old soldier's jaw was tight, his voice steady. "We need to move. That coyote could circle back, and your raccoon doesn't have much time." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind reeling. Only minutes ago she had been folding laundry, her thoughts on dinner and bedtime. Now she was staring at a creature bleeding into her lawn, the very creature she had once doubted, the one that had just saved her child. She shifted Chloe higher onto her hip and reached out with trembling hands to touch Bandit's side. His masked face tilted weakly toward her, his whiskers twitching, his golden eyes dulled with pain but still alive. He made a faint chittering sound, soft as a sigh. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. "Oh, Bandit," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What have you done for us?" Tom crouched down, setting the rifle against the porch rail. His weathered hands were surprisingly gentle as he inspected the wound. He's hurt bad. That coyote got him deep, but he's a fighter. If we can get him to Stevens fast, he might stand a chance. Dr. Stevens was the local veterinarian who had treated the Mitchell family's old dog years before. Sarah knew the clinic was across town, at least a 20-minute drive, even with no traffic. She blinked through her tears, nodding quickly. "I'll get the car." Tom reached down and slid his arms beneath the raccoon. Bandit squirmed faintly, more from instinct than strength, then went limp in the man's grasp. Tom grunted with the effort, his voice low. "Never thought I'd be carrying one of these on purpose." He looked up at Sarah, his stern face softened. "You grab the baby. I'll carry him." The rush to the car blurred in Sarah's memory. She strapped Chloe into her car seat with hands that shook so badly she fumbled the buckles twice. Tom laid Bandit gently into a cardboard box lined with towels, sliding it onto the floor of the back seat. The raccoon wheezed, his chest rising shallowly. Sarah's heart squeezed as she started the engine. "Drive," Tom said firmly, climbing into the passenger seat with his rifle still slung across his back. "I'll keep an eye on him." The road into town stretched long and straight, the trees slipping by in streaks of green and shadow. Sarah's eyes darted between the highway and the rearview mirror, where she could see Chloe's wide, frightened eyes and Bandit's motionless body. Every mile felt like an eternity. Halfway there, Bandit let out a sudden, sharp cry that made Chloe whimper and Sarah gasp. She nearly pulled over, but Tom's hand landed on the dashboard with quiet authority. "Don't stop. He's still breathing. Just keep steady." Memories flooded Sarah's mind. The first day she carried him home wrapped in a blanket, Chloe's laughter when Bandit stole her rattle, the way his mischievous eyes glowed in the kitchen light. Each moment pressed heavier on her chest. For all his trouble, all his chaos, he had been part of their little family. And now, because of her careless 60 seconds, he might be lost. When the small brick building of Stevens' clinic finally came into view, Sarah nearly sobbed with relief. She swung the car into the gravel lot, tires crunching, and threw it into park. Tom leapt out, cradling the box as though it held something more fragile than any weapon he had ever carried. Sarah grabbed Chloe and followed at a run. The glass door banged open under Tom's shoulder. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and cedar shavings. Dr. Stevens, a tall man with thinning gray hair and a calm presence, looked up from the counter. His expression shifted instantly when he saw the bundle in Tom's arms. "What happened?" he demanded, hurrying them into the exam room. "Coyote," Tom said flatly. "Went for the baby. The raccoon took the hit instead." Dr. Stevens blinked, surprised, but didn't waste a second. He spread a clean sheet across the metal table, motioning for Tom to set Bandit down. Sarah clutched Chloe close, standing frozen in the doorway as the vet and his assistant moved swiftly. They cleaned the wound, checked his breathing, and started fluids through a thin tube. The sight of the raccoon's small body surrounded by medical equipment tore at Sarah's heart. "Will he make it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Stevens didn't look up, his hands steady as he worked. "He's lost a lot of blood. The bite is deep. Infection's the biggest risk, but he's still fighting. That's in his favor." Chloe whimpered softly, burying her face against Sarah's shoulder. Sarah stroked her daughter's back, whispering comfort she didn't feel. She wanted to be strong, but her knees trembled. She thought of Tom's words, his warnings that had sounded so harsh. Yet here they all were, mother, child, neighbor, and raccoon, bound together by a single act of bravery. At last, Stevens looked up, his eyes grave, but not without hope. "I'll keep him here overnight. The next 12 hours will tell us everything. You should go home, get some rest, and pray he's as strong as he looks." Sarah nodded numbly, her throat too tight for words. She bent to touch Bandit's head, her fingers brushing the soft fur just above his mask. His ears flickered faintly, as though he knew she was there. "Hold on, Bandit," she whispered. "Please, just hold on." Tom placed a hand on her shoulder as they stepped back into the fading light of evening. His grip was firm, steady, the kind of reassurance only a man who had seen many battles could give. For the first time since they'd met, Sarah didn't feel his judgment, only solidarity. As she buckled Chloe into the car once more, Sarah glanced back at the clinic. The building seemed small against the wide Idaho sky, yet inside it held the fragile thread of a life that had already changed theirs forever. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Sarah started the engine, her chest heavy with fear but also with something else, gratitude. For all the chaos Bandit had brought into her life, in the moment that mattered most, he had chosen to protect her child. And now, all she could do was wait. The drive home from the clinic felt longer than the one that had taken them there. The gravel crunched under Sarah's tires as she pulled into her driveway, the house looming quiet and still against the evening sky. She carried Chloe inside, her daughter's warm weight pressed to her chest, and the silence felt unbearable. No mischievous paws scuttling across the floor, no rustling in the pantry or clatter of overturned bowls. For the first time since he had come into their lives, Bandit wasn't there to fill the space. Sarah set Chloe in her crib and lingered, brushing the fine blonde hair off the little girl's forehead. Chloe whimpered once, as if sensing her mother's unease, then drifted off to sleep with her thumb in her mouth. Sarah leaned against the crib rail, her shoulders sagging. When she closed her eyes, all she could see was Bandit sprawled on the exam table, the blood dark against his fur, the thin sound of his breath rattling. She moved to the porch and sank into a chair, staring into the fading light. Tom Walker sat on the steps, rifle propped against the railing, as if he hadn't quite left his old habits behind. His face was unreadable, but his presence steadied her. For years, he had been the voice of caution, the one telling her this was a mistake. Now, he had carried Bandit into the clinic himself. "You did what you could," Tom said quietly, his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Now it's up to him." Sarah swallowed hard. I never thought he'd risk himself for her. Not like that." Tom let out a slow breath. "Neither did I." He turned his head, his weathered face softening. "You know, I was ready to tell you, I told you so one of these days. But that animal proved me wrong. Tonight, he was braver than most men I've known." His words settled over Sarah, unexpected and strangely comforting. She gave a small nod, but the ache in her chest didn't ease. The phone rang later that night, startling her from a restless doze on the couch. She snatched it up, heart pounding. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Dr. Stevens' steady voice carried through the line. "Bandit made it through the first few hours. He's stable for now, but we're not out of the woods. Infection could set in. We'll keep him on fluids and antibiotics through the night. I'll call again if there's any change." Relief swept through her so swiftly she had to sit down. "Thank you, Doctor. Please do everything you can." "I will," he promised. She hung up and sat in the dim glow of the lamp, staring at her hands. They were trembling, the memory of his fur slick under her fingers still raw. She pressed her palms together, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The hours crawled. She checked on Chloe every half hour, smoothing her blanket, watching the rise and fall of her tiny chest. Between each visit, she returned to the couch, staring into the darkened yard. The blanket still lay where Chloe had played, a faint stain marking where Bandit had fallen. The sight tore at her. A single minute, just 60 seconds, and everything had changed. Tom came back near midnight, carrying a thermos of coffee. He handed it to her without a word and sat down again on the porch. They didn't speak much, just sat listening to the night sounds. The silence between them was no longer sharp with judgment. Instead, it was the silence of two people bound by worry. At 2 in the morning, the phone rang again. Sarah nearly tripped as she rushed to answer. "It's Stevens," the voice came. "He's holding steady. His vitals are stronger. He even stirred a little while we cleaned the wound." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling. "Thank God," she whispered. But even as relief washed over her, fear lingered. She had seen how close he had come. She had seen the blood on the grass. She knew one good sign didn't mean victory. Still, she clung to those words like a lifeline. By dawn, her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, Chloe toddling around her feet in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The morning light spilled over the yard, and for the first time since the attack, Sarah felt a fragile thread of hope. When the phone rang again just after sunrise, she held her breath. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Stevens said, his tone calmer now. "He's improving. The swelling has gone down. He's still weak, but if he keeps this up, you might be able to bring him home tomorrow." Sarah closed her eyes, her body sagging against the chair. Chloe looked up at her, sensing the shift, and smiled. Sarah lifted her daughter into her lap, holding her close. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, though part of her still feared to believe it. As the sun climbed higher, she thought back to Tom's words on the porch. Bandit had been braver than most men, mischievous, troublesome, impossible to control. But in the moment that mattered, he had chosen to fight. The waiting wasn't over. But for the first time since that horrible 60 seconds, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to see him limp through the door again, those masked eyes glinting with mischief. And she realized then how deeply he had already claimed a place in their family. The night had tested them all. Now came the long, uncertain dawn. The house felt hollow without him. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the windows seemed to echo in the empty rooms. Sarah had lived through quiet nights before. Nights when grief pressed on her chest after her husband's passing. Nights when Chloe's cries left her too tired to think straight. But this silence was different. It was the silence of waiting, and it gnawed at her with every tick of the clock. She sat curled on the couch with a blanket draped around her shoulders, the phone resting on the coffee table within arm's reach. Chloe slept upstairs, her soft snores drifting faintly through the baby monitor. The house should have felt safe, but Sarah's mind replayed the attack in loops. The flash of the coyote's teeth, Bandit's small body lunging forward, the sound of his cry when the predator's jaws closed on his shoulder. She pressed her palms to her face and tried to breathe. Tom came by again, unannounced but expected. He carried 2 mugs of black coffee and a small tin of cornbread wrapped in foil. Without a word, he set them on the table and lowered himself into the chair across from her. For a while, they just sat, the old soldier's presence grounding her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "You've seen worse," Sarah murmured, staring at the dark window. "You've seen real battles. How do you wait like this?" Tom rubbed a hand across his weathered face. "You don't get used to it. You just learn to keep breathing until the news comes." Sarah nodded slowly. That was all there was to do. Breathe, pray, and wait. The phone rang just after midnight. Her heart lurched as she snatched it up. "Mrs. Mitchell," came Dr. Stevens's calm voice. "He's still holding steady. His vitals are weak but consistent. He's resting." Relief flooded through her chest so fast she nearly wept. "Thank you," she whispered. When she hung up, she saw Tom watching her with a faint smile. "That little bandit of yours has more grit than I gave him credit for." "He saved her life," Sarah said softly. Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. Tom looked away, giving her the dignity of her tears. The night stretched on. Sarah drifted in and out of uneasy sleep on the couch, the blanket tangled around her legs. Dreams haunted her, images of bandits slipping away, of Chloe reaching for him with tears in her eyes. Each time she woke, she checked the phone, half expecting bad news. At 2 in the morning, another call. "He stirred when we cleaned the wound," Stephen said. "That's a good sign. He's a fighter." Sarah clutched the phone to her chest after she hung up, whispering a prayer of thanks. She hadn't prayed much since her husband's death, but tonight the words came easily. She prayed for the little creature who had turned her world upside down with his trouble and his tenderness. The hours until dawn were endless. She checked on Chloe 3 times, brushing her daughter's hair back from her forehead, marveling at how peaceful she looked. Chloe shifted in her sleep and murmured one word that made Sarah's breath catch. "Bandit." It was soft, half-dreamed, but clear. When the sky finally began to lighten, painting the horizon in pale pink and grey, Sarah felt a fragile calm settle over her. She stepped onto the porch, wrapped in her blanket, the cool morning air sharp against her cheeks. Tom was there again, as if he'd never left, sipping from his dented thermos. They didn't need words. The quiet between them spoke of shared fear and fragile hope. The phone rang again just after sunrise. Sarah's hand shook as she lifted it. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Stevens said, his tone warmer now. "He's improving. The swelling has gone down. He's weak, but stronger than last night. If this continues, you may be able to bring him home tomorrow." Her knees nearly buckled. She sank into the porch chair, clutching the phone, tears spilling freely. "Thank you, Doctor. Thank you." When she hung up, Tom gave a short nod, the closest he came to showing joy. "Looks like your troublemaker isn't done causing mischief yet." Sarah laughed through her tears, the sound raw but real. For the first time since that terrible moment in the yard, she let herself believe he might make it. As the sun climbed higher, she sat with Chloe in her lap, the little girl babbling happily with her stuffed rabbit. The world outside looked ordinary again, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. But Sarah knew everything had changed. Bandit had proven himself in a way no one expected. Mischief maker, thief of shoes and cereal, yes, but also guardian, fighter and hero. The longest night was over. The waiting wasn't finished, but hope had returned. And for Sarah, that was enough to carry her into the new day. The next afternoon, Sarah parked her car in front of the small brick clinic, her heart pounding as though she were about to receive a verdict that might alter her life forever. Chloe sat strapped in her car seat, humming to herself with her stuffed rabbit pressed close, unaware of the weight her mother carried. Sarah stepped out into the crisp Idaho air, her hands clammy on the steering wheel, before she even shut the door. Dr. Stevens met her at the entrance. His tired but steady smile gave her a measure of relief before he even spoke. "He's weak, but the worst has passed," he said, gesturing for her to follow. "He's ready to go home, as long as you keep up with the medicine and limit his movement." Sarah nearly sagged with relief. She followed the doctor down the hallway to a quiet room where Bandit rested in a large kennel. His fur was shaved around the wound, stitches pulling the torn skin closed. A bandage was wrapped snugly around his shoulder, and an IV line dangled loosely beside him, already removed. His masked eyes flickered open as Sarah approached. "Hey, troublemaker," she whispered, tears already rising. The raccoon stirred, lifting his head with effort. His gaze fixed on her, then slid to Chloe, who peeked from behind her mother's legs. For a moment, the room was silent, but for the sound of Chloe's soft gasp. Then, clear as a bell, she said, "Bandit!" It was the first time she had spoken his name with such clarity. The word hung in the air, simple yet monumental. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Dr. Stevens paused, a faint smile touching his lips. "Well," he murmured, "looks like he's already part of the family." Later, with Bandit tucked gently into a carrier and a bottle of antibiotics in her purse, Sarah drove home. Every glance at the back seat where Chloe babbled and reached toward the raccoon made her chest ache with gratitude. The little creature who had once been the cause of so much trouble was now the reason her daughter was alive. At home, Tom was waiting on the porch. He stood with his hands shoved into the pockets of his faded jeans, his weathered face unreadable. When Sarah lifted the carrier from the car, he stepped forward. "Well, he made it," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "He's coming home." For a moment, Tom just stared at the box, the faint rustle inside. Then he nodded once. "Guess I owe him more credit than I gave him." That evening, Sarah set up a quiet corner in the living room with blankets and a shallow dish of water. Bandit moved stiffly when she opened the carrier, testing his injured leg before easing onto the pile of soft fabric. Chloe clapped her hands and squealed, wanting to rush to him, but Sarah held her back gently. "Easy, honey. He needs to rest." Still, the bond between them was undeniable. Bandit's eyes followed the child, his head tilting each time she babbled. When she reached her small hand toward him, he sniffed the air, then settled back down with a weary sigh. In the days that followed, life found a new rhythm. Sarah hid the bitter antibiotic pills in bits of cooked chicken, coaxing Bandit to eat them while Chloe giggled at his greedy paws. His limp was noticeable, and he tired easily, but each morning he grew stronger. His mischievous streak, though dulled by pain, began to peek through. One evening, Sarah caught him tugging at the corner of a dish towel until the whole stack tumbled to the floor. Another morning, he nosed open the pantry door and sat inside as though he were king of the shelves. Tom stopped by more often now. Sometimes he brought groceries or a bag of sweet corn from a neighbor's farm stand. "Thought your hero might like a treat," he said gruffly, though there was no missing the fondness in his eyes as Bandit pawed eagerly at the husks. "He's no angel," Sarah teased, watching as Bandit scattered kernels across the floor. Tom chuckled, a sound Sarah realized she'd never heard from him before. Guardian angels come in all shapes, I suppose. One afternoon, Sarah put Chloe down for a nap and sank into the couch, exhaustion washing over her. She must have dozed because when she stirred, she noticed the raccoon curled at the nursery door. His injured shoulder still stiff, he kept his body close to the ground, his sharp eyes fixed on the crib where Chloe slept. The sight stopped her breath. Bandit wasn't playing or searching for food. He was standing guard. Sarah leaned against the wall, her throat tight. Tom's words from that terrible night returned to her, braver than most men. And as she watched the small figure silhouetted against the pale light of the nursery, she realized it was true. Mischievous, thieving, impossible to control, but when it mattered, he had become something else entirely. When Chloe woke, rubbing her eyes and babbling nonsense, Bandit didn't move until Sarah opened the door. Only then did he shuffle back to his blanket, as if he knew his watch was finished. Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, whispering into her hair, "We're safe, baby. We're safe because of him." Outside, the sun slipped lower, painting the Idaho sky in soft gold. The world was ordinary again. Trucks rumbling on the distant road, children calling to each other down the block. But inside Sarah's house, something extraordinary had taken root. A raccoon with nimble paws and a mischievous heart had claimed his place among them, not as a pet, not even as a guest, but as a guardian in his own wild way. By late summer, the story had spread through the cul-de-sac and beyond. What had once been whispers about Sarah's recklessness turned into wide-eyed retellings of how the neighborhood raccoon had fought off a coyote to save a baby. At the farmer's market, where she once endured glares and harsh words, vendors now asked, "How's that little hero of yours doing?" Children no longer shouted, "Mask trouble," when they saw Bandit. Now they called him Hero, chasing after him with giggles when he waddled through the yards. Sarah could hardly believe it. Each day she saw Bandit regain more strength, though the scar across his shoulder never disappeared. It was a reminder of how close they had all come to losing him, and how much he had risked in a single moment. He no longer darted around the house with the same tireless energy, but his spark hadn't dulled. He still pawed open the pantry door, still tugged towels to the floor, still snatched food right out of Sarah's grocery bags. His mischief was different now, less wild, more playful, as though he knew he had earned his place. Tom Walker changed the most. The old soldier who once warned Sarah that the raccoon would bring danger now stopped by with small offerings. Ears of corn, apples from his tree, a bag of day-old rolls from the bakery. Each time, he would pretend it was for Sarah and Chloe, but he always ended up crouching down to watch Bandit eat. One evening, as Bandit pawed at the bread with his nimble fingers, Tom chuckled. "Never thought I'd say this, but I sleep easier knowing he's out here. Guess every outpost needs a guard." Sarah smiled, hearing the honesty in his voice. It wasn't just acceptance. It was respect. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Chloe toddled across the yard in the evenings, her laughter carrying through the warm air, while Bandit kept a slow, watchful pace nearby. Sarah watched them from the porch, her heart tugging every time she remembered how it might have ended. Sometimes, late at night, she would slip outside to find Bandit perched at the edge of the yard, staring into the woods as though daring the dark to try again. One evening in early September, the neighborhood gathered for a small block party, the kind of simple event where folding chairs lined the sidewalks and kids rode bikes between picnic tables. Sarah brought a dish of baked beans. Chloe balanced on her hip, and Bandit followed at her heels, ignoring the gasps of the neighbors. When a group of children squealed and offered him watermelon slices, he snatched one and sat back on his haunches, juice dripping down his whiskers. The crowd laughed, and for the first time, Sarah didn't feel judged. She felt proud. As the sun dipped low, painting the Idaho sky in streaks of orange and purple, Sarah carried Chloe back to their porch. Tom followed with a folding chair, settling beside her. Bandit padded along and hopped onto the step, his striped tail curled around him. Chloe clapped her hands and toddled forward, holding out a wooden block as though offering him a gift. Bandit sniffed it, tilted his head, and sat quietly, his golden eyes glinting in the fading light. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It was such a simple moment, a child offering, an animal watching, but in it lay everything she had come to understand. Family didn't always look the way people expected. Sometimes it was born out of chaos, out of mischief and fear, and sometimes it revealed itself in the instant when one life chose to protect another. Tom cleared his throat. "You know," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "I was wrong about him. I thought he'd be nothing but trouble. But I see now, he's not just yours. He belongs here, to all of us." Guardian like that? Well, you don't turn away from it. Sarah nodded, her heart too full for words. Chloe leaned against her leg, her tiny voice piping up with surprising clarity. "Bandit safe." The raccoon blinked slowly, as though agreeing, then turned his gaze back to the darkening tree line. The stars began to appear, faint at first, then brighter, scattered across the sky. Sarah gathered Chloe into her arms and stood. Bandit rose too, limping but steady, following her steps toward the house. Tom lingered on the porch, his eyes watchful, his rifle resting against the rail, though it had not been needed since that night. Inside, the house glowed with the simple comforts of home, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft rattle of toys in the corner, the faint scent of soap from Chloe's evening bath. Bandit curled into his usual spot near the nursery door, eyes half closed but alert. Sarah tucked Chloe into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "We're safe, baby." "We're safe because of him." When she turned off the light, she paused to look back. Bandit was still there, his masked face lit by the sliver of moon through the window, his presence a quiet promise, mischievous, wild, untrainable, but hers, theirs. And as the night wrapped itself around the little house on the edge of the woods, Sarah understood what she had been given. Not just protection, not just survival, but the rarest kind of gift. A family built in the most unlikely way. A mother, a child, and a raccoon who had crossed the line between wild and home, forever changing them all. And now I want to hear from you. If you felt your heart racing when Bandit risked his life, just drop a simple 0 in the comments. If this story touched you, type 1. It's that easy. Your little comment means the world. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next incredible story waiting just around the corner.